Welcome to Through the Bible with Les Feldick, a 30-minute walk through the Scriptures, teaching in-depth Bible truths that change people's lives. Now, here's your host, Les Feldick.
Okay, good to see everybody in again, and we'll just pick right up. We left off in our last program in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, and we'll still stay in verse 10 for a moment. But again, we always like to welcome our television audience, and we just trust that you'll search the Scriptures with us. And for those of you who just tuned in, you realize we've come all the way from Genesis up through the Old Testament and this far through the New. So if you'd like to catch up with us and you want to pick up what we've covered, you can do that with either the videos or the audios or the printed page. And if you're interested in any of those, you just give us a call or drop us a line and we'll get the information to you. I think that's all I want to do for announcements. We've got so much to cover, and these half hours go rather rapidly. So I'm going to start right in where we left off in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 in verse 10. Now remember that the Antichrist has now, since the middle of the tribulation, become the absolute world despotic leader. And with the technology that we're getting more and more every day. See, always have to stop and comment. Do you realize that none of this end-time prophecy could have ever been even imaginable had it not been for our technology? But see, our technology is all making it all so believable. We know that there's going to be a technology that will globally position every individual. They'll know where we are. There's no place to hide. And so during the tribulation, this will all peak, and they're going to have whatever technology is needed to fulfill what we're seeing in the Scriptures. And that's what makes it so, what should I say, so believable. 20 years ago, this was still something you had to take by pure faith. But today, you can just see it coming faster and faster. And I was reading an article the other day. You know, we haven't heard much about fiber optics for the last 5, 6, 7 years. Now, all of a sudden, the communications experts are coming back to fiber optics, and they're realizing that they can just almost exponentially increase the number of messages going on just one little hairbreadth line. And it just is mind-boggling. And when they tell you that they can put all the New York Times newspapers that have ever been printed on one little chip. And I read another article where this is the whole thrust of our electronics industry is to keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And there's almost no limit to it. Well, all of this is just telling us that it's getting the world ready for this absolute governmental control of the masses. Now, I guess the first thing I have to clarify, 2 or 3 at break time got the idea that I said no one could be saved during the tribulation. Now, I did not say that, and I got to clarify that. Only those who have heard the grace gospel that Christ died for them and rose from the dead, and they can have it free for nothing by simply believing it, and they have rejected it, they're not going to have a second chance. They've had their opportunity. They understood it. They considered it. The Holy Spirit enlightened them, but they said, thanks, but no thanks. I'm having too much fun. I don't want to give up my wicked lifestyle. I'll do it later. Well, bless their hearts, and I feel for parents who are weeping for children out there that are in the world and lost. But don't give up. Don't give up. I'll never forget, years back, I had a dear old gentleman, we were talking about this very thing. And I could see the tears running down his cheek at the back of the room. And he came up afterwards, and I asked him, I said, I'm not going to name him because there are people listening in my audience that they'd know who it was. And I said, what's the matter? And he said, Les, I've got 2 grown sons. Grew up in our local Sunday school class, but he said they never heard the gospel. And he said, they're out there in the world making big money and they're lost. He said, if the Lord should come tonight, he said, they'll be left behind. And I said, well, at least you can take comfort in the fact they haven't heard the gospel. They're not in that category. But he said they'll be left behind. Well, now he doesn't know it, because he is now off the scene. But here just a week or two ago, we got an email, wasn't it, from one of those boys. And he had come to know the Lord, and he was studying our material. Oh, how I wish I could have let that weeping father know. Well, one of the two have come in. Maybe the second one will come too. So never give up. If your parents out there and your kids are out in the world, don't ever give up. You just keep praying and praying and praying that the Lord will somehow open their heart. So all right, let's first qualify if I was misunderstood. I didn't say that, but I might have been misunderstood. Come back with me quickly to Revelation chapter 7. We always got to clarify first if there's a need. Revelation chapter 7. And we'll just start at, verse 3. Revelation 7, let's just jump in at verse 3. I haven't got a lot of time for this. Revelation chapter 7, verse 3. And so the angel said, hurt not the earth, nor the sea, nor the trees, until, time word. They need a segment of time. And what are they going to do? They're going to seal the servants of our God in their foreheads. And then he comes in and lists that it's 12,000 young Jewish men from each one of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, of course, I think Dan is left out, if I'm not mistaken. It's been a while since I've looked at this. But I think Dan is the one left out, and one of the other sons of Joseph is brought in. But nevertheless, there will be 12,000 young Jewish men, each out of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now you see the doubter scoffs, doesn't he? He says, well, no Jew knows what tribe he's from. No, I know the Jews don't, most of them, but God does. And you know, God in his sovereignty, in his own way of doing things, has somehow or other preserved 12,000 young men that will be identified with each one of the 12 original tribes of Israel, except Dan, because they went into idolatry. But these 144,000 young Jewish men, virgin men, never married, and they're going to go out and circumvent the globe. I've always said this is Israel's redeeming moment. What the nation failed back there in Acts chapter 1, 2, and 3, these 144,000 Jews are almost going to make up for it. Now, I don't like to quote people unless I'm real sure, but I'm quite sure it was Tim LaHaye in one of his books. Tim LaHaye made the comment that he thought more people would be saved, and if he finds out that I said this and I'm wrong, I apologize before he even has to call me on it. But I'm sure he wrote in one of his books on Revelation that he feels there will be more people saved during this 7-year period under the preaching of the 144,000 than were saved in all the ages of the church. Now you say, how can that be? Well, you've heard me use the numbers. Why is God going to bring such wrath and judgment on this last closing generation of people? Because the numbers. There are more people living on the planet right now than have lived all the way back. Because you want to remember, the world's population for centuries on centuries was like 500 million, half a billion. That's all. And it wasn't until about the middle 1800s that doubled to 1 billion. And that happened in about the early 1900s. Now, of course, since the early 1900s, it has doubled and doubled to where we're now 6.5. And it's going to double again in a few more years, see? So it's numbers. And so, yes, I can see the potential that there could be more people saved in the tribulation than have ever been saved in the church age. But I'm not saying I agree with that 100%, but I do know this. Revelation chapter 7, verse 9. After these 144,000 young Jews have been commissioned, they've been sent out around the planet. They will go supernaturally, remember? They won't have to buy airline tickets. They won't have to learn languages. They won't have to fear for their life. No one can take their life from them. That's the purpose of the seal in their forehead. But they will evidently suffer privation. They're going to suffer hunger. They're going to suffer heat and cold. They're going to suffer imprisonment, but they can't take their life. All right, now look what the results of their missionary endeavor will do. Verse 9, after this I beheld, and lo, a great multitude, which no man could number. Now I know that's an, what shall I say, that's a undefinitive number, but whatever. It's a large number. And look where they come from. Not Israel. They come from all nations and kindreds and people and languages. You know what that tells me? Even into some of these third world nations where they have all these different dialects, and certain parts of Africa with all of their dialect, these 144,000 Jews are going to penetrate every one of them. And they're not going to have to stop and learn the language. They're not going to have to stop and get transportation. They're going to go like the wind. And they're going to have a tremendous response. But who are these people? They are people who have never heard the gospel of the grace of God. They are people who have not heard it and rejected it. They are people who will not have taken the mark of the beast, because Scripture tells us as soon as they agree to that mark in the forehead or the hand, they shut off their opportunity for salvation. Now immediately, if you just sit and think for a moment, what part of the world has the most people who have never heard the gospel and who are not up technologically, that as soon as the world is announced that they're going to have this number or this mark, I think it's a computer number, in order to buy and sell, what area of the world could care less? Well, a good portion of the third world. They're not used to credit cards. They're not used to our high technology. And so I can see the masses of Pakistan and India and China and places in Africa where these people will respond to this gospel of the kingdom, not the gospel of the grace of God. And they're not yet the owners of the mark of the beast, and so they're going to respond by the millions. But we also know from Scripture that they're going to be martyred as soon as they believe. Now that again comes to the technology. Just as soon as they make their profession of faith, the authorities will know it and they'll be put to death. So that consequently only a precious few of those tribulation believers will survive. But there will be. Isaiah 64 tells us that there will be a few men left. But to qualify now where I was misunderstood, yes, there's going to be multitudes saved during the tribulation. But coming back to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, it cannot be anyone who has heard and contemplated and rejected the gospel. They're going to come under the complete wrath of God, and in order to justify God's wrath, they are going to embrace this Antichrist and his system as what the world was really looking for in the first place. All right, come back to Thessalonians, and Paul, I think, makes it so plain. Reading verse 10, which we've already pretty much explained. So with all the deceivableness of unrighteousness, see, nothing righteous in what they do. It is all fomented from the satanic powers. And it's in them that perish. They're going to be lost for eternity, because they received not the love of the truth, which we pointed out in our last program was the gospel. They rejected that Christ died for them and rose from the dead, that they might have been saved. Oh, they had the opportunity, but they rejected it. Oh, verse 11. Make a little headway anyway. For this cause. See how plain it is? For this cause. Well, you got to stop once in a while and go back. What's the cause? They heard the gospel and rejected it. Plain enough? They have heard the gospel. They've considered it. They rejected it. Consequently, for this cause, God, the sovereign God, who knows the number of hairs on the head of every individual. They're not going to be able to fool him for a minute. And so God will send them, these who have rejected the gospel and are alive now in the tribulation, God will send them a strong delusion. What's he going to do? He's going to fry their brain, I guess we could say. He's going to mix up their thinking. To what extent? They're going to say the Antichrist is the God we're looking for. He's the Messiah that the Bible was talking about. He's the one that we can follow. And we won't have to change our lifestyle. We can keep right on doing what we've been doing when we follow him. And that's the delusion that God will put in the mind of every human being, regardless of where they are on the planet, who has heard the gospel and rejected it. Listen, if I were a lost person today, I would rather never hear the gospel as to sit under it Sunday after Sunday or week after week and reject it. That's going to be worse. And so it's those who have heard it and contemplated it and rejected that God will send a delusion. He's going to change their thinking. And what is their thinking going to do? It's going to make them believe what? The lie. And what is the lie from Genesis 3 to Revelation 20? You can be like God. Am I right? Yeah. That's the lie. Let's go back in Genesis. Let's go back to Genesis. That's where it all began, remember. Genesis chapter 3. Verse 5. In fact, you can take verse 4 with it. This is all part of the lie. Satan's lie. And he's a master in carrying it out. Genesis chapter 3, verse 4 and 5. Eve, of course, you all know the setting, is in the garden looking at the tree. And the serpent, which was merely the vehicle that Satan was using. And so the serpent said to the woman, "You shall not surely die." Well, now what is that? It's a lie. Eve did die, spiritually, later on physically. But Satan says she wouldn't. All right, he says, "Thou shalt not surely die." But now look at verse 5. For God. See how smooth he is? For God doth know. See, he had to bring God in. Have you ever noticed that the politician, if he's worth his salt and he has a great, big, important message, and I think FDR was probably one of the masters of it, they never end a speech without, in the last sentence or maybe a paragraph, who do they have to mention? God. Oh, somehow or other they'll say, "May God bless our nation," or they got to bring God in at least that much. But see, Satan is a master at it. He doesn't just say, "Well, now I'm telling you," but he says, "No, listen." He says, God doth know that in the day you eat thereof your eyes shall be opened. Of course God knew, in a far better way than Eve could ever understand. But he says, God doth know in the day you eat thereof your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as what? Gods. Isn't that what the human race is looking for? Yeah. Oh, to have the power of a God. That's right. And that's the lie. See, Christianity never teaches that we will be gods. That's right. The New Agers do. A lot of the Orientals do. But our gospel never teaches that we become God. We're going to be joint heirs with Christ. We're children of God, but we'll never be gods. Remember that. But that's the lie of Satan. Oh, come on, Eve, eat, and you can be like God. The lie. All right, it's going to carry all the way through the human experience. This constant urge to believe the lie of Satan. All right, back to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Verse 11 again. And for this cause, because they rejected the gospel. It's that simple. For this cause, God shall send them a strong delusion that they should believe the lie. That they don't need the gospel of the grace of God. They're going to follow this man, Antichrist, who is going to let them become gods. Now verse 12. What's the end result? It's frightening. I mean, this is something to be scared about for an unbeliever. They should be. That they all, not just some of them, all of these people who have heard the gospel, have considered it, they know it's the truth, but they say, not now, maybe later. Some more convenient time, isn't that the way Agrippa put it? Sure. Not now. All right. That they all might be condemned. See? Condemned. Who believed not the truth. See, God isn't going to condemn them because of their evil works. That was just an outflow of their old satanic nature, of which all of us had the potential. But why will God in justice and righteousness condemn them to such a fate? Because they rejected the truth of the gospel. You know, we were talking the other day. If the gospel of the grace of God was something that would just demand $1 million, or a trip overseas, or to climb some high forbidding mountain, people would be after it by the millions. But here we offer something that is absolutely free. Free. You don't have to do anything but believe it. And then let God do the rest. But what do the masses say? Not interested. They could care less. And I'm sure the heart of God breaks when He sees the masses of humanity so indifferent. Now, it'd be different. I could understand their rejecting of it if we were laying a lot of demands on them, like a lot of the cults do. And listen, adherents of cults take on that gladly. But God doesn't expect that. God says, I've done it all. All you have to do is believe it. Now, a lot of people may say, well, now, Les, why do you make such an impact on believing? Now, listen. Every one of us are human. And I've used this example before. Any one of us, if we were suddenly caught in a position that we had just witnessed something, regardless, whether it's an accident at an intersection or maybe a murder or whatever, we had witnessed it. We saw it. And we fully knew every little detail without any doubt in our mind. And when somebody came along and said, well, what did you see and hear? And we tell them, with all the honesty at our disposal, and they turn around and say, I don't believe you. What are they calling you? A liar. Now you see, every person that rejects this offer of God's grace, in so many words, is just saying, God, you're lying to me. I don't believe it. And when you believe it, it thrills the heart of God to such an extent, He saves us to the uttermost. Oh, it's so simple. It's so simple. You remember, I've given the example on the program before. I had a lady quite a few years back. She's probably dead and gone by now. But, oh, she was in such distress about her eternal destiny. And so after our class one night, she came up and she wanted to know the plan of salvation so she could have the hope of glory. And I explained the gospel in all its simplicity. I said, just recognize that you're a sinner, that you're undone, and that Christ has done everything that needs to be done. All you have to do is believe it. And that poor lady looked up in me with almost the eyes of a Cocker Spaniel and says, "That's too simple." See? Isn't it sad? Now, if I could have told her, "Now listen, lady, if you can scrape up $50,000, if you can go such and such, and if you can do this," she'd have been elated and tickled pink, wouldn't she? Yeah, she would have. But when you tell them it's so simple that all you have to do is believe it, they just shake their head and say, "Can't buy that." Oh, it's sad. I'll tell you it's sad. All right, now then, back to 2 Thessalonians again. You're going to get tired of hearing it, aren't you? 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. But when these people believe the lie instead of the gospel, verse 12 says they're all going to be condemned to their lost eternity because they believed not the truth. Repeating what I said a moment ago, he doesn't mention their wicked lifestyle. He doesn't mention the things that ordinarily people would think would keep them from eternity. All he says, what? Because you did not believe. Now, a verse comes to mind, and I'm going to use it in our closing moments. Come over with me to Hebrews chapter 3. Been a long time since we've used these verses. Hebrews chapter 3. We'll have to do this rather quickly, I imagine, because it's always been this way. Now, what we're talking about in Hebrews chapter 3 is when the children of Israel were brought up to Kadesh Barnea on the southern border of the Promised Land. And they have just come from the experience of Mount Sinai, where they had built that golden calf and they had fallen into the idolatry that they had brought out of Egypt. But now God has brought them up to the southern border of the Promised Land, and he's told them to go in and take it. I'll drive the Canaanites out with hornets, whatever else it takes. You won't have to lift a single weapon. You won't have to lose a drop of blood. Go in and take it. What'd they do? Oh, they said, "We can't do it. We're like grasshoppers in their sight." And so now look what God's controversy was because of it. I'll have to do this quickly. Drop all the way down to Hebrews 3, verse 17 and 18 and 19. Hebrews 3, 17, 18, and 19. But with whom was he grieved? Now verse 18, to whom swear they should not enter into his rest, but to them that, what? Believed not.
Thank you for watching Through the Bible with Les Feldick. Through the Bible is a partner-supported ministry. If this program has been a help to your study of the Scriptures and you'd like to see others enjoy the teaching, your support would be greatly appreciated. Write to us at Les Feldick Ministries, Route 1, Box 760, Kinta, Oklahoma 74552, or call 1-800-369-7856. Remember, all programs are available in printed form, audio cassette, and videotape. Be sure to tune in next time to Through the Bible with Les Feldick.